We all know Shakespeare to be the greatest playwright who ever lived. The master of human nature, the voice that gave us Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth, the man who invented over 1,700 words we still use today. But what if that never happened? What if William Shakespeare, after facing brutal criticism for his first play, decided to give up writing forever? One man's choice, changing everything.
History is written, but what if? London, 1592. After harsh reviews of Titus Andronicus, a young playwright sits alone in his chambers. The critics have been merciless, barbarous, they declared, unfit for civilized society. In this moment, William Shakespeare makes a choice that will echo through centuries. He sets down his quill forever. Little does he know this moment will reshape language, culture, and human expression for centuries to come. Chapter 1. Life without Shakespeare. Let's bring our attention to today's world. To London 2025. London's Globe Theatre stands today, but something is missing. Tour guides speak of Christopher Marlowe and Ben Jonson, but the stage feels incomplete, waiting for a voice that never came. Even today's actors sense the void. They perform the available works with skill, but something in their hearts yearns for roles that were never written, characters who never came to life. These words don't soar, one actor mutters to his colleague. We need something more transcendent. Audiences enjoy the performances, but they leave unchanged. Without Hamlet's introspection or King Lear's rage, theatre informs, but doesn't transform souls. People applaud politely, not passionately. No one weeps. No one is reborn by what they've witnessed. In London's literary cafes, poets struggle with language that feels incomplete. They search for metaphors that don't exist, for a richness that was never added to their tongue. "I need a word for when you see something eye-catching," one writer says to another. "Or when someone walks with overconfidence," her friend replies. They flip through dictionaries, finding nothing. Even the barista overhears their frustration. "Sometimes I feel like words are missing from our language." A young man struggles to write a love letter to his girlfriend. "How do I say you're beautiful?" he wonders, crumpling paper after paper. Love finds no perfect voice. Young hearts struggle to express feelings that soar beyond ordinary language. The greatest love poems were never written. Chapter 2. Ripple Effect. Historically, Queen Elizabeth I commissioned court entertainments and supported the emerging commercial theatre. Without Shakespeare's history plays, which we know helped establish the Tudor myth, court writers might have developed different approaches to royal propaganda. Christopher Marlowe, historically Shakespeare's contemporary and rival, dominated tragic drama until his death in 1593. With no Shakespeare to push theatrical boundaries, Marlowe's influence might have remained more constrained by classical models. Thomas Kyd, author of The Spanish Tragedy, represented the popular taste for revenge drama. Without Shakespeare's psychological innovations in Hamlet, revenge plays might have remained more externalized and less introspective. Historical records show the London theatre scene was highly competitive. Philip Henslow's diary documents the rapid turnover of plays and the constant demand for new material. Without Shakespeare's prolific output, historians credit him with 37 plays. Other writers would need to fill approximately 500 to 600 performances over his career. Ben Jonson, historically a rival who later praised Shakespeare, might have developed differently without that particular creative competition. His classical learning could have dominated English drama more completely. King James I, historically interested in witch trials and Scottish history, commissioned entertainments that reflected his interests. Without Macbeth, which historians believe was written partly to flatter James, court masques by Inigo Jones and Ben Jonson might have remained the dominant form of royal entertainment. The development of indoor private theatres like Blackfriars might have proceeded differently. These spaces, which Shakespeare's company acquired, could have remained primarily venues for court-influenced drama, rather than developing the intimate psychological style we associate with his later plays. Historically, Puritans opposed theatre partly on moral grounds, but also because of its associations with monarchy and traditional religion. Without Shakespeare's complex moral explorations, which later critics argued elevated drama beyond mere entertainment, Puritan arguments against theatre might have prevailed more completely. The 1642 closure of theatres might have lasted longer or become permanent without the cultural weight that Shakespeare's works would eventually carry. When Charles II reopened theatres in 1660, managers initially revived pre-Civil War plays. Historically, Shakespeare's works underwent significant adaptation by writers like Nahum Tate and John Dryden. Without these plays to revive and adapt, Restoration theatre might have developed more completely, along French neoclassical lines. Thomas Betterton, the era's greatest actor, built his reputation partly on Shakespearean roles. Alternative developments might have favoured different performance styles, possibly more influenced by continental models. John Dryden and later Samuel Johnson developed English literary criticism partly through wrestling with Shakespeare's irregular genius. Without Shakespeare to analyse, English criticism might have remained more rigidly neoclassical, following French models like Boileau's Art of Poetry. The development of English literary theory could have proceeded along more systematic, rule-based lines rather than grappling with the creative disruptions that Shakespeare's works represented. Historically, actor-manager David Gerrick revolutionised English acting by developing more naturalistic performance styles, partly in response to Shakespearean character complexity. Without these roles, English acting might have remained more declamatory, following continental traditions. Garrick's management of Drury Lane Theatre relied heavily on Shakespeare revivals for financial stability. Alternative programming might have made theatre management more precarious, potentially limiting theatrical innovation. American colonial culture, historically derivative of English models, might have turned more heavily toward continental European influences. Without Shakespeare as a unifying cultural touchstone, American cultural identity could have developed more regionalistically. The Founding Fathers' education included classical rhetoric and English literature. Historical figures like John Adams and Thomas Jefferson quoted contemporary English poets, but their intellectual formation might have been more heavily influenced by French Enlightenment thinkers without English literary nationalism. Chapter 3. The global impact. Historically, the British colonial education system, as documented by scholars like Gauri Vishwanathan, used English literature to establish cultural authority. Without Shakespeare's works, this system might have relied more heavily on religious texts and classical literature. Indian intellectuals, already sophisticated in their own dramatic traditions, Sanskrit drama and regional performance forms, might have engaged differently with English culture. The absence of Shakespeare could have allowed for more cultural exchange rather than the hierarchical relationship that historically developed. Matthew Arnold's Culture and Anarchy, 1869, argued for literature's civilizing mission. Without Shakespeare as the supreme example of English genius, Arnold's arguments might have taken different forms, possibly emphasizing moral and religious literature over aesthetic achievement. The growth of public libraries and mass education, documented by historians like Jonathan Rose, created new reading audiences. Alternative literary canons might have developed more democratically, drawing from folk traditions and working-class writers. American writers like Walt Whitman and Ralph Waldo Emerson called for cultural independence from Britain. Without Shakespeare as the towering figure of English literature, its independence might have been achieved more easily and completely. The development of American English, as studied by linguists like H.L. Mencken, might have proceeded more rapidly without Shakespearean prestige maintaining British linguistic authority. Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic theories, historically influenced by his reading of Hamlet and other Shakespeare plays,
might have developed along different lines. Carl Jung's work on archetypes drew partly from Shakespearean character types. The understanding of human psychology in literature might have evolved through different influences, perhaps more heavily influenced by Russian writers like Dostoevsky, or emerging anthropological studies. War poets like Wilfrid Owen and Siegfried Sassoon processed trauma through available literary forms. Historical analysis shows they drew from romantic and classical traditions. Without Shakespearean models of heroism and its costs, war literature might have developed different approaches to representing conflict. The concept of total war challenged traditional heroic narratives. Alternative literary traditions might have been better equipped to handle this new reality. European avant-garde theatre, from German Expressionism to Soviet constructivism, developed partly in reaction to traditional dramatic forms. Without Shakespeare as the pinnacle of traditional drama, experimental theatre might have evolved more gradually and organically. Bertolt Brecht's epic theatre techniques specifically challenged Shakespearean dramatic structure. Alternative historical development might have produced different innovations. Film historians note that early cinema drew storytelling techniques from various sources: vaudeville, melodrama, and literary adaptation. Without Shakespearean plots as prestigious source material, cinema might have developed more original narrative structures from the beginning. The Hollywood studio system's development of genre conventions might have proceeded differently, possibly creating more diverse storytelling traditions. Post-colonial literary theory, as developed by scholars like Edward Said and Homi Bhabha, analyzes how colonized peoples write back to colonial literature. Without Shakespeare as a central colonial text, these relationships might have developed differently. Writers like Chinua Achebe, Wole Soyinka, and Derek Walcott might have engaged with English literary tradition through different foundational texts, possibly creating alternative forms of cultural dialogue. Television drama development, studied by media historians, initially drew from theatrical traditions. Without Shakespearean dramatic structures as foundational models, television might have developed more cinematic or radio-influenced narrative techniques. The concept of quality television might have established different criteria for dramatic excellence. Literary education reform movements, documented by scholars like Gerald Graff, debated curriculum priorities. Without Shakespeare as the unquestioned centre of English literary study, these debates might have produced more diverse and inclusive curricula earlier. The development of world literature as an academic field might have proceeded more rapidly without English literary nationalism centered on Shakespeare. Digital communication patterns, as studied by linguists like David Crystal, show how new media create new language forms. Without centuries of Shakespearean phrases enriching English, digital culture might have developed different patterns of reference and allusion. Meme culture's relationship to literary tradition might have evolved along different lines, possibly drawing more heavily from contemporary media or oral traditions. The development of English as a global lingua franca, documented by sociolinguists, relied partly on cultural prestige associated with English literature. Alternative historical development might have seen other languages or multiple languages serving international communication needs. Large language models trained on human texts reflect the literary traditions they consume. Without Shakespearean influence on English literary development, AI language capabilities might have developed different characteristics, possibly more practical and direct, less metaphorically complex. Chapter 4: Cultural Assessment of Alternative Timeline. By the early 21st century, this alternative world has developed its own rich cultural patterns. Without Shakespeare's influence, human creativity has found different channels, different expressions, different ways to explore the depths of experience. Global theatre showcases reveal diverse traditions. French neoclassical drama, refined over centuries, demonstrates formal perfection. German expressionist techniques evolved from different sources, explore psychological complexity through visual metaphor rather than poetic language. Japanese no and kabuki, Chinese opera, Indian classical dance dramas, these traditions flourish without competition from English cultural dominance. Cross-cultural exchange proceeds more democratically, with no single tradition claiming universal authority.
University comparative literature programs study truly global canons. Students analyze Sophocles alongside Kalidasa, Racine next to Chikamatsu, without English literature claiming special prominence. African, Asian and Latin American voices achieve recognition earlier in this timeline, without having to compete against centuries of Shakespearean cultural authority. Literary traditions develop more diversely, more inclusively. The absence of Shakespeare's linguistic innovation has interesting effects. English develops more conservatively, but other languages expand to fill international roles. French remains the language of diplomacy longer. Spanish literary influence grows stronger in the Americas. Mandarin, Chinese, Hindi and Arabic maintain stronger cultural prestige without English literature's global dominance. Multilingualism becomes more common among educated classes worldwide. Human psychology has been explored through different literary lenses. Russian novelists like Tolstoy and Dostoevsky carry greater influence. German philosophical traditions shape understanding of consciousness and identity more completely. Psychoanalysis develops along different theoretical lines, drawing more heavily from continental European sources. The understanding of human nature proceeds through alternative pathways, perhaps more systematic, less poetic, but no less profound. Without Shakespeare's monarchical focus, kings, princes, nobles dominating dramatic literature, democratic culture might have developed stronger indigenous traditions. Folk literature, working-class voices, and popular culture achieve higher status earlier. The concept of high versus low culture remains less rigid. Cultural hierarchies are different, possibly more fluid and egalitarian. Television, film, and digital media have evolved their own storytelling conventions. Without centuries of Shakespearean dramatic structure influencing narrative expectations, entertainment might be more episodic, more collaborative, more experimental. Social media culture draws references from contemporary sources, songs, films, political speeches, rather than classical literature. Communication is more immediate, more democratic, possibly less layered with historical resonance. This alternative world is not culturally impoverished, it is culturally different. Human creativity has found other outlets, other expressions, other ways to explore love, power, mortality, and meaning. Literature exists, drama exists, poetry exists. They have simply developed along alternative pathways, shaped by different influences, serving different cultural functions. Chapter 5. The Eternal Question. One man's choice to set down his pen could have changed the course of human culture forever. A moment of discouragement, a decision to abandon art, rippled across centuries to diminish every human heart. What voices are we silencing today? What futures are we choosing? In coffee shops and classrooms, in bedrooms and boardrooms, in every place where someone holds a pen or opens their mouth to speak, the power to change the world lies waiting. How many potential Shakespeares walk among us, discouraged by critics, dismissed by gatekeepers, ready to give up after their first attempt? History isn't just what happened, it's what almost did. If you enjoyed this timeline, subscribe for more alternate histories. History is written, but what if?